if you guys watch that show, he interviews famous people. So I have 4 famous people to interview today. But first, I'm going to give the microphone over to Dr. Edwards, because this is cross-listed as a brown bag. So there are people here that aren't necessarily in Gen Lex. So I'll hand it over to him first.
Wonderful. Good morning to all of you. Good morning. My name is Walter Edwards. I'm the director of the Humanities Center, and I'm absolutely delighted that the music department has agreed to a collaboration between the Humanities Center and the music department. I think it is due to the wonderful leadership of the chair of music, Dr. Duncan, who always wanted to see music as being cross-disciplinary, particularly to channel the humanistic characteristics of music. And he himself, over several years, has been a member of the Brown Bag team. He has performed several times on this program. So this is a collaboration between the 2 departments. And it is my pleasure to first introduce Wendy Matthews, who is going to serve as the moderator. And one of her moderator's duties is to introduce the other members of her team. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to Wendy, and then she will take the microphone and introduce her colleagues. She is an assistant professor of music education here at Wayne State. She holds a bachelor's degree from the Peabody Conservatory of Music, a master's of music degree from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a doctor of philosophy and education degree with concentration in educational psychology and instrumental conducting from George Mason University. Her research interests focus on self-regulation, motivation, group dynamics, and performance in music and academic-related domains. She has published in numerous journals, including the Journal of Research in Music Education, Psychology of Music, International Journal of Music Education, and Journal of Band Research. That's the end of my formal introduction, but I wanted, before turning the microphone over to her, to thank her for her personal contribution to the work of the Humanities Center. She has served as a resident scholar. We have a program in which people from across the university spend a year or 2 in the Humanities Center working on projects. And she was there for a year, along with 2 other of our music colleagues. And she was a phenomenal contributor. Even though she was a musician, she took the time to read and understand other people's work. And her interest in education, I think, fitted very well in our programs. Also, she, together with Josh Dushan, who's a musician here, and who was also a resident scholar, and Emery Stevens, who's a member of your department and also a resident scholar at the time, got together and had a workshop in which they shared their techniques of collecting information and doing research in the field with the university community. So I'm delighted to be part of the program in which Wendy is the moderator. As you know, the topic of today's talk is the changing field of music education, advice for teaching private lessons to K through 12 students. So please give Wendy a round of applause.
All right, as Dr. Edwards says, when I was thinking about what to do today, because Mr. DeRose had cornered me and said I had to do a Gen Lex. And I wanted to make sure that the Gen Lex was important to you guys, so that you guys have some things to think about. And a lot of you, many of you, We'll be teaching private lessons at some point in your life, and you'll also be teaching somebody at some point of your life, even if it's your own child or your parent. So we're going to talk about that. What I'm going to do first is have each person in the panel introduce themselves and talk about how they teach 12th graders and below. Because you guys pretty know how most of us teach college students, because you've had us all as professors. But we're going to talk about that. What I did was had each one of these people tell me 5 things that they really wanted to impart to you. I put those all together in different ways, and you'd be amazed at how close everybody had the same wishes. Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of us have very, very similar philosophies. And then I asked Madison to go through and interview anybody she could find in the hallway and ask what kind of questions you guys would like to hear. So I've got questions from you guys. If we have enough time, there will be questions on the floor if you have any of that. So I'm just going to start off real quick. I started teaching private lessons at the age of 16. I charged $4, and I taught 5th graders. And it was really fun, and I fell in love with teaching at that point. And I've been teaching since I was 14, and I'm not going to have you guys do the math to figure out how many years that is. But my students have ranged from students that were had disabilities, from students who majored in music. I have 2 students that play in professional orchestras. I have one who's a professional rock musician. He's the lead guitarist for MGMT. And I also have about 9 students that went on to be band directors. But what I'm more happy about is the students that are still playing. I have people that are doctors, that are accountants, all sorts of things, but they still play, and they play in their adulthood, and they still love music. So my philosophy is music is for all, and I want everyone to have access. Of course, I believe the trumpet is the best way to express music, but we'll deal with that later. But I'll hand it over to Dr. Roloff, who's going to talk about her experiences, and we'll do it down the line, and then I have questions for you guys.
So most of you know me. I'm Laura Roloff, so if you don't know me, I teach violin here and some viola. And I have also been teaching since I was in high school, although my first student was actually an adult beginner, and I still love adult beginners, but that's a whole another piece of cake. I started teaching young ones when I was in college. I think I was 18, and we had a pedagogy practicum class where we actually had assigned private students for our class, and it was great. We had supervised private teaching, and I learned a lot, and I really got hooked on it then. So I've been teaching ever since. And I've had a home studio, so I've never had a huge home studio, but maybe the top number that I had in my home studio at times was about 15. And the bulk of my teaching K-12 is actually from a really interesting project that you guys might think about. It's very unusual, but we had a string quartet in residence at a K-12 institution. That doesn't happen very often. Most string quartets are in residence at colleges. But we had a 2-year college residency, which the funding went away, and we actually went and found a wonderful, prosperous private school that could afford us, and we taught the string program there, and we gave a lot of private lessons. So that went on for about 10 years or so, and so I got a lot of students that I was teaching through there. But even during that time, I had a private studio, and I still have a private studio, a small one. I try to keep about 3 to 4 high school age students or junior high age students. I love teaching pre-college students. It's great. What else did you need to know?
Just the philosophy.
Yeah, I actually think it's very close to what Dr. Matthews said. I feel like my mission with my students is to help them learn to speak the language of music and bring out their joy in music, and then give them the technical equipment so that they can express themselves to whatever level they are able to. And I don't think that we should make assumptions about how far who's going to go, because it really doesn't matter, as Dr. Matthews said, whether they choose to be a musician or not. We're going to give them the equipment to play as well as they possibly can, and wherever they're starting from. And I also have some students that are wonderful, wonderful players, but have chosen other fields. And I'm proud of them because I know that they're going to be great amateurs and great audience members. So one of our missions as teachers is to keep the culture of music going, because we need audiences as much as we need performers. But of course, I'm also proud of my students that have become professionals. But so that's, I think you're going to hear that from all of us. It's setting them up with the equipment that they're going to need to go as far as they want to go.
Hi, I'm Abby Butler, and I'm vocal music education professor and work with students here in Wayne who are interested in teaching general music as well as choral music and choral music education. And my teaching experience has been in the public schools for since the mid-1980s. And I know, you can do the math. But I've been teaching, since that time I've taught kindergarten through college-age students, and have taught in a variety of different circumstances, and have done some studio teaching with kids, primarily at the high school age level. Vocally, you usually do not want to start kids before they're 14, 15 years of age. So my experiences in the studio working with kids privately has been high school students and certainly some college students. My philosophy for the studio is, I like you use one of my favorite words, which is joy. And I think that singing should be joyful, and it's a wonderful experience. I want my kids to, wherever they are, whatever age they are, but certainly individually, I want them to experience the joy of making music, and with their voice. That's you just always feel physically so great after you sing. So I want them to have that. I want them to reach, their potential to grow as far as they're interested in, as much as they can, and to hopefully open new ways of looking at things, new ways of experiencing music, and to develop their vocal skills so that they are healthy singers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's an important thing for me. I think for any voice teacher, the most important thing that you need to keep in mind always is to do no harm. So that's enough for me.
Hello, check. Hello, I'm Matthew Younglove. I started my teaching, I think everyone starts teaching informally before they start teaching formally. And that starts as simple as you're sitting next to someone and you hear them play a wrong note and you go, oh, it's actually this note, or maybe try this fingering. And those things start really early. When I started teaching formally was about the same age as Dr. Matthews. I was 16, and I adjusted for inflation and charged $8 an hour. $8 a half hour I was charging for 30-minute lessons. I was teaching mostly 6th graders. So the school district that I went to had a number of middle schools, so I just reached out, made little flyers, and at the time, prior to that, I've always been entrepreneurial because my parents didn't give me money and I wanted it. So I thought, what can I do to make money? And I had a lawn mowing business in my neighborhood, and by the time I got better at the saxophone, I was tired of mowing lawns and decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I adjusted and became a lessons teacher. And it started with a couple people, a couple times a week, but by my senior year, I had 10 students. And I was teaching for $10 an hour at that point. So every year I went up $1. That was my reward for another year of teaching in my experience. So it started in that way. When I was in undergraduate, I had fewer students because, as you all know, time is precious as undergraduate students. So I always kept a studio of 2 to 3 at that point, and then after I finished my master's degree, I decided I was going to take some time off from school and went into a freelance situation where I moved back to the network I had, used the band directors that I went to school with that were now out in the schools and had jobs, and traveled to 3 different cities. I was centered in Columbia, South Carolina, but I spent a day in Charleston, South Carolina, and 2 days in my hometown near Charlotte, North Carolina. So kind of a road warrior, but I was traveling quite a bit, and I built a studio. I don't remember the exact numbers, but somewhere between 25 and 30 students a week, in addition to working with marching band programs when I happened to be in those areas, and a number of different things. So it was very much just piecing together a lot of different income sources. And I think that's an important thing to be thinking realistically about now, if that's one potential avenue for you when you graduate. How are you going to put together this love of what you're doing into making a living doing it? I would say my teaching philosophy regarding private lessons would be that I want to enable, and it's a little different from, I'm going to backtrack for a second, a little different for high school and pre-college than what it is for college. So my philosophy for teaching people from grade 12 and below is I want to enable you to enjoy your own playing, because I think it's more fun to be better at something you're doing. And that's fundamentally, it's rooted in fun. It's better, if you're better, you have more fun. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I'm Russ Miller, and associate professor here in the Jazz Studies program. I started teaching privately in my senior year of high school. Studied in high school from my band director in junior high and high school, and so my senior year he gave me a couple of students and other students to start with. And I carried that on. After high school, I got involved teaching at a music studio, which was convenient because I didn't have to go out and shop for students. They provided me with students. Of course, they also take a piece of the money too, so it's a part of the equation. But it was nice because I had a steady flow of students, usually 4th grade through 12, beginner. Occasionally an adult beginner, like Laura said, that's a whole other story. It's interesting, different perspective on how learning goes. And everybody's philosophies, I could mirror everything that was just said since 4 people went in front of me. Trying to get the students to have the best experience possible. One of the things I like to try to do is to show the students my passion so that they can feel and get the passion for themselves. Knowing full well that at that young age, they're not going to be professional musicians. Some will, some won't. But I want to give them all the best experience that they can get. And not put too much pressure on them, and at the same time, teach them how to give you discipline and focus, and also to enjoy what they're doing.
So from now on, we're going to all jump in, and I'm going to let different people talk in different orders. So if you see something passionate you want to talk about, just hop in. The first question I have for everybody is discuss a little bit about how you structure your private lesson during that half an hour or an hour. What things that you feel must be in a lesson. Like, for example, for me, they call me the scale queen. When you walk in, everybody has a scale project, and that runs from major scales to scales and thirds to blues scales to arpeggios, and they always have something that they have for me that is involving around some sort of music theory and also to get things warmed up. So I'll let anybody passionate about, go ahead.
I like to get the student to get centered and focused. And so there's scales or etudes or whatever it is they're doing. But I have a long tone exercise that I do, and if any of you my college students do it. But the purpose of it is that right off the bat, we're focused on just a note and a sound, not a whole lot of notes and a lot of stuff to do. And it gets the student in the mindset of being centered. Got to feel my body, got to feel all the air pressure it takes, in this case to play the saxophone, or it might be a flute or a clarinet, to feel my face, to feel my throat, and get in touch with all the physical processes, and settle the mind down to be able to focus on what's going on. And even today, this is really important, I believe, because of our shorter attention spans, because we all walk around and do this all the time now, even in the middle of a conversation, and to get somebody to sit down and focus for 30 minutes and not wander and drift. So it's a real challenge. So I start off a lesson with a real simple thing. It's a long tone exercise. It can take anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes, depending on what we need to do to get the student to settle down. It's kind of a Zen type of thing, but at that point, then we're focused. We can move on to another area.
I could jump in. For singers, it's really, really important that that they are physically relaxed, that they're, and especially, you know, with some of your students, some kids just come like they're just bundles of tension, and so they're not going to be able to sing well at all if they have any of that tension there. So I usually begin my lessons with stretches, exercises, just physical exercises, not verbal things, but just getting them to loosen up physically, shoulder tension, neck tension. And in the process of doing that as well, you're also getting them to, like you say, calm down and get that focus. It's almost like you want to have a mindfulness routine, if you will, for your students to just help them get into that zone of like, okay, let everything out, leave everything else out the door, and it's just you and the music here. Once we do that, once they're physically ready, then initiate some just very simple and basic warm-ups to get them vocalizing. And lots of lip trills, which are good for singers, but I want it to be very gentle. It would never start in by having them start on their most difficult piece or even any piece. We always begin with various types of exercises to loosen up the voice, get it started, and then whatever aspects of their technique we're working on, exercises that would build that.
I'll jump in right here and add a little bit. I'd like to divide lessons into 3 segments, and that being the first one is represented by the letter T, tone and technique. The second one is by the letter E, exercises and etudes, and the last one by the letter R, repertoire. So tone, technique, exercises, repertoire. And if you divide any of the standard lengths of lessons, be 30 minutes, 45, or an hour, they all divide easily by 3. So you can structure your lessons in such a way, you can try to keep your eye on the clock when you're working with students to try and get through those things. But I also structure it like a meal. You have to finish one before you can move on to the next. And any of my college students will attest to that, that sometimes we'll spend all of our time on the appetizer and we don't get time for dessert. So to that end, I think tone and technique is your appetizer. It warms you up, long tones, working on some technical things. Etudes are microcosms of musical things that you can study, and you can focus on doing more of them in shorter periods of time than you can with repertoire. And there are various exercises that come with etudes. And then with repertoire, you're actually getting into real music, the things you're going to be performing, and that's the dessert. That's where you're putting all the things from the tone, technique, exercises, and etudes realized into one idea or into one musical work.
I completely concur with everything that's been said. I want to add 2 things. One is that depends a little bit on for me, I find it depends a little bit on the level of the student, how much time we have to spend on each of those aspects. And with the younger kids, I find I spend a lot of time with the physical part. Like, with string playing especially, it's similar to vocal music in that your body is your instrument pretty much. And so you really have to make sure, with younger beginners, you have to make sure, any age beginners, you have to make sure that they're set up, and you may have to fix their setup every single lesson for a long time. You know, you may have to repeat this over and over for a long, long time. And then there's the other aspect that oftentimes you'll get someone who has either played in school for a while and has never had private lessons and has ended up with all kinds of random bad habits as a result, or someone who's been studying with a teacher that didn't pay attention to the physical aspects very well, or didn't give them good advice, and you have to make some changes. There's remedial work to have to do, and again, you may have to spend a lot of time. And then you have to kind of do a balancing act. How are you going to challenge this person and make them, have them enjoy things while you're doing these necessary things? Because eventually it's not going to be fun for them. So it's, you're going to have the responsibility to do this change. So short answer, I totally agree with Matt's balancing act, and sometimes you will find that appetizer takes the whole time because you're working so hard on actually how to create a sound out of the instrument and be healthy. It's an injury risk to play with poor playing habits, so it's not just musical risk, it's a physical risk.
Great, thank you. So now I want to move on to talking about resources that we would like to let you know about, that our philosophies, things that we really hope that you as private teachers will really think about. One of the things that we talk about, small children and how their attention spans and things like that. One of the things I don't do is I don't use their band method, because typically a kid who's studying in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, you're going to surpass what they get done in their 6th grade band, because a lot of times they only get seen twice a week or 3 times a week. So keeping them motivated is really, really important. And part of the motivation is not having them be like, well, I'm so far advanced from my band or orchestra program that they become a behavior problem or an attitude problem. So I always separate that. But I do say at the end of the lesson, if there's anything in band or orchestra you need help with, we will do it after you've done your appetizer, your meal, and that can be your dessert. And typically, by the time we get going, we've gotten a lot farther ahead than what they're typically doing in their school. So for me, it's about choice and motivation and making sure at the end that when you have little ones, that you do play Pirates of Caribbean, because it's in 12/8. There's a lot of things you can teach with pirates in the last 5 minutes. So always choose your repertoire for reasons, and keep those kids really motivated and interested. So if you guys want to talk about any resources or things, yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in quickly with resources. Having been someone who's taught in multiple different states, I think it's important that you understand the metrics with which those students see success. And usually that means all-state bands, all-state orchestras, all-state choruses. I think you need to check those metrics. How are those things assessed, and how can you build that into your curriculum to help your students achieve that, for 2 reasons. One, whether or not the state has the best system in the world, they're going to feel a sense of accomplishment through that, and it's going to want to drive them to do more. And two, if you have sort of a reputation of having students that make those, that gets out and that gets you more students. So it's a practical thing just as much as it is a student motivation thing. They want to compete. That's why people play football. They want to be at the school that wins. So you want to tap into that sense of human nature. I think you can get a lot out of those metrics that are preset for you.
And understanding solo and ensemble, knowing what repertoire is counted, what repertoire isn't counted, because we are a performing art. So every one of my students is required to do solo and ensemble, period, because we need to practice performing. So.
Just to jump on that really quickly, if you're a string player, there are 2 curricula that are available to you. There's an ASTA, American String Teachers Association, has a huge list of pieces at various levels so that you'll know what kind of repertoire is at what level in most people's estimation. Sometimes I don't agree with their ratings, but it'll give you a rough idea. And then there's a wonderful curriculum that's made by the Toronto Royal Academy, which you can also find online now. It used to, you have to buy it, but now you don't have to buy it. And that's also a bunch of graded music, and some of that music we don't know because it's by Canadian composers. Some of it's familiar, some of it's not, and some of it's great. And you can buy their books, which are a little bit, like, they're not method books, they're actually collections of solo repertoire that you can give students, and it starts at and I think they have one for all instruments actually, so it's not just string players, that one. It's piano and voice and all this stuff, and there's very definite grades, and you can actually help your students see that they're graduating from one grade to another. So that kind of assessment internally in your lessons can be good too. And I would just add that if you can have your students perform frequently, make recitals for them, make opportunities, have them enter competitions, keep up to date with what's available in terms of competitions and recital opportunities, because the biggest motivator, honestly, is to perform and do well and get applause, you know? So it's really, really, really deadly to go on and on and on in lessons and never play in public. So you have to have them playing in public at least once a year, plus any other opportunities that may come up in terms of solo and ensemble, etc.
Just a quick couple of things. If you're teaching in Michigan, then you want to make sure that you're familiar with the Michigan School Vocal Music Association and their website. If you become a member, it's not terribly expensive, especially if you're a student. And they have repertoire lists for solo and ensemble, so it's a good resource for you to find repertoire that's appropriate for your students. That said, if you're teaching voice, you're kind of in a weird place sometimes, because you may find that you have students who come to you who want to learn to sing in a variety of styles or genres. And the track that I learned, which was classical vocal music, and my expertise in actually lieder and art song with some operatic stuff, is very different from if you're teaching somebody who wants to learn jazz or who wants to sing pop or gospel, that sort of thing. And so one of the things you're going to need to decide is which types of music, which genres, which styles do I want to teach? Am I comfortable teaching? Am I knowledgeable enough to teach these singers? And please don't teach something that you're not familiar with, because you can do a lot of harm if that's the case. So your repertoire, your resources are really going to be varied depending upon the style of music that you have and that you choose to teach. So I would say you want to start collecting and looking for resources, for books, for repertoire, in whatever genres you are interested in, and to just build up your collection. There's no one particular etude book or study or methods, like you have a methods book with band instruments, or say that's not really the same thing for singers. You just have a lot of different things up there. There's also a lot of junk, and there's a lot of stuff that's not well written that you want to check these things out very carefully. Just because, it's Alfred Publishing and it's up on J.W. Pepper website doesn't mean that it's the best thing to teach from.
I would address, for instrumentalists, in addition to repertoire, there is the issue of the method book, and what method book should you use. Back when I was a undergrad student doing my ed degree here at Wayne State, I had the fortune to have Joe LaBuda as my instructor, and he had an assignment for us. It was related to band, but the same thing applies. Take 3 different band method books and compare and contrast and outline the strengths and the weaknesses of each book. Well, you can do the same for a method book for private instruction. And it's a really good idea. Talk to a bunch of other teachers who use a method book, find out what they use, get a copy of each one of it, and sit down and play through it. And see what you like about the book. See what you don't like about the book. Compare and contrast them. When I use the method books, no book is perfect. No book contains everything that you need. But some books had a nice logical progression. Then the things that were missing, I would try to fill in those gaps with other materials. And sometimes that meant even writing out my own materials for the student based on what the student needed at that point in time. And that's where your own experience can come into play, because you say, oh, this would be really useful. I can't find a copy of that, but I've got some paper and pencil, and I can write down something for the student to do, and you're addressing those needs right there. And that's really, your resources includes that, but it also includes your own background and all the things you learned to get to the point where you're a teacher. All those, that's part of your resources. So don't ignore your own inclinations and your own experience.
When we're speaking of resources, I just wanted to make you all aware of, we're probably going to have other books that we recommend to you, but on this exact topic, there's a book called The Stage to the Studio. It's by Cornelia Watkins and Laurie Scott, and although they are string players, this book was not written just for string players. It was written for any musician that's trying to use their expertise as a performer. This is why I'm jumping off of Russell's comments. How to use your own background as a prior student, a current student, and a performer to make yourself the best possible teacher. And this book is phenomenal because it takes you through all kinds of personal inventory exercises and thinking about how to use your prior experience and what you know and what you want to know to make yourself a better teacher. So this is a huge, huge resource for you guys. And I would highly recommend, if you're at all interested in teaching, to just buy the book and go through it. We use it in pedagogy class, but you guys should do it anyway. And go through it, and it actually has another section in the end of it which applies to the entrepreneurial aspects and the business aspects, although there are other books that also do that. But this is one that really focuses on how to use your expertise as a musician to make yourself a better teacher.
I'm going to do double duty. So I also wanted to mention that the National Association of Teachers of Singing, NATS, is an organization those of you who are singers will want to be members of. The great resources. They also have some great ways for you to network, to build your studio, and highly recommend it. The other thing is there's a book that you can get on Amazon for $14.92. I highly recommend it. Have the book. It's by Joan Boynton, and it is the Private Voice Studio Handbook, and it tells you basically everything you need to know about organizing your studio from A to Z.
I want to add one quick thing to what Professor Miller was saying regarding creating exercises for students. When you have a student that has a problem and you come up with an exercise for it, write it down not only for the student, write it down for yourself, and then give it a name. Once you've named an exercise, not only you're more likely to remember this tool you created, your students are more likely to remember it when they're away from you. I found over time and time again, just giving exercises without names, we'd be like, oh, let's do that one that starts with the thing like this. So I just started naming all of my exercises, and everyone remembers what they are once you've named them. So you create an identity with it, and that's important when you're creating your teaching bag of tricks.
Are there any bass students in the audience? Raise your hand. Bass students? So what's a funny name for an exercise that you guys have for shifting? Starts with a vomit. Vomit drills. Yeah, that's a great example.
None of us are going to forget that. So I want to take a little turn, and we're getting ready to talk about entrepreneurialness, and we want to talk now about some things that you need to think about outside of actually the 30 minutes that you're teaching. One of the first things that I want you guys to think about is, where do you teach? I was in a situation when I was very young that I went to a school and I taught after school, and by the time I finished my last lesson, nobody was in the building but me and that child or the next child. So you need to think about, how do you integrate parents with what you do? Is there a window in your studio door? Because you are alone with children. and you need to make sure that you are protected and they are protected as well. For me personally, my dining room is my studio. It opens into my living room, and I've always said I have an open lesson policy. A parent can always come and sit on the couch and listen to the lesson. For the younger ones, it's great because they do say, hey, I didn't hear you play those Clark technical studies, so it helps with lessons to have the trumpet players' parents there, but it also helps protect you. So please think about how you interact with the parent and how you are alone with the student when you are doing private lessons. So if anybody has more entrepreneurial things to
I'll
add.
tag onto that really quickly. If you start teaching and this is your primary means of income, when you're looking at getting a renter's insurance policy, which is something that you probably have at least encountered at some point in your life, see if you can tag on a personal liability policy for when you're teaching with students. Because with litigation society, all it takes is an accusation to derail a lot of things. It is very important that you have some method of protection. I had a policy, I think I paid $12 a month, and it covered, I think, up to $1 million worth of damages. And that's important. That's an important thing. That's a real life thing that you don't think about until it's too late sometimes. And if you're going to go into this profession, you need to make sure you have means to protect yourselves financially long term.
If somebody slips on the ice outside your door, that come into your residence.
Yeah, if you're teaching from your house, that's an important thing.
Yeah, and that's a real advantage to the way Mr. Miller does it. If you're working for a music company, even though they took part of his fee, that fee covered liabilities. It covered things. It also covered canceled lessons. They took care of a lot of the administrative things for him. So you have to think about which setting you're willing to be in, or a combination of those settings. So.
And if you do go it on your own, and there are big advantages to going on your own as well, because you're in more control of things, you do have to you have to be more savvy about creating contracts with parents. You have to make sure that you're going to know when you're going to get paid, how often you're going to get paid, how you're going to get paid. Are you going to do cash? Are you going to do checks? Are you going to take PayPal? How are you going to get paid? And how often, and how are you going to enforce getting paid? And parents appreciate this, and they will respect you more if you present yourself as a very together professional rather than, oh yeah, pay me next time, whatever. So you're going to want to think about these aspects as well. All of these financial aspects are really, really important. So yeah, it's part of it.
And tagging into that, it's important to have a very clear cancellation policy. I think it's important to make sure, I recommend getting paid by the month, at the beginning of the month.
Yes, that's the best.
That discourages cancellations, because if you have a policy that says, if I'm here teaching whether you show up or not, then people are more likely to come and not going to let, I have homework, be an excuse to not come to their lesson. And also learn to operate on 80% of your anticipated income, because you will never get that 100% number. There's always going to be some factor. The more students you have, the more conflicts will arise. And you're going to find all of a sudden, if you plan on operating at like 95 or 100%, you're not going to quite make it some months. And that's an important distinction.
You can also consider financial incentives for longer contracts. Like you could give them a little bit of a discount if they pay you for 3 months or a semester. Have a semester system. Then you're really organized. You're like a music school, and you can pay them they can pay you for a longer time. And again, if they choose not to use those lessons, that's up to them. It's like if you join a yoga class or something and you choose not to go, but you've paid for those classes. So you can look at other types of classes as models. Exercise classes are a really good example of that.
And exercise classes often have initiation fees. My youngest brother just started taking voice lessons, and I was I had my mind blown when my mother called me and said, we have to pay $135 just to get him in the door for his first lesson. And then they had to pay their first month as well. So what that does, you can't start with that policy in the beginning, you won't have any students. But once you're established, that is a great way to make sure you're getting people who are going to be there and who care about what they're doing and not going to waste your time. Because automatically you have a slight barrier. Again, this is not great advice for if you're starting out, but it's great advice for once you get started. Some of these little tricks people have created to ensure a level of seriousness in their students is kind of an interesting policy.
And to piggyback on that, what do you guys do if you have a student that's not working out for you? Either they're not practicing or their personalities don't mesh with you. How would you deal with that?
How bad do you need the money? I think that's actually a really important question. Because sometimes you have to teach because you have to make rent that month. Other times, once you get established and you're able to be a little more picky, I think you need to have a discussion and maybe an out clause within your contract saying that, you know, if you don't meet the standards 3 weeks in a row, I can terminate this contract early, or I mean, I've heard teachers use the word fire students before, like, oh, I fired that student. Like, that's kind of extreme, but there are cases that arise that need that, because you only have so much time in the day to teach.
And assuming that these students are all living at home with their parents, and their parents are paying for the lessons, you go to the parents and you say, you are wasting your money, and you try to get the parents to help you to motivate the student to actually do the work, or else. And if it is, it's sometimes you have to have a conversation with the parents, because sometimes it's the parent's idea that the student is taking the lessons, and sometimes you have to disabuse them that this is that important. If the student truly does not want to be there and is not going to work, then the parent's idea that they should do this may not be the best, and you may have to go directly to the parent in that situation.
I'd like to piggyback on that too, we're doing all this piggybacking here. But I had situations like that even at the music studio, and what I found worked best was when I had constant communication with the parents after each lesson. They waited outside in the waiting room, but I would come out after each lesson and speak with the parents right then and there about the good, the bad, and everything in between, to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And there were times when there was a student who was being pushed into taking lessons, who really and truly did not want lessons. And we came to tears during the lesson. And at that point, we need to have a powwow with mom and dad and student right now, on the spot, and put all the cards on the table. And at that point, then, everybody comes to terms, and the parents realize that, well, maybe we're pushing this too hard, and maybe this isn't the right thing for this particular student. Yeah, I'm going to lose a student, but this is a person, a young person, who's very unhappy, very upset, emotionally wrought, and it's, you know, who needs that stress that early in their life?
Music forever after, because someone need that
And to piggy on everybody saying, make sure you really talk to the parents. Don't be afraid of the parents. The parents are really a piece of this puzzle, and it's really important that they're on board and they understand. Everybody knows I love to tell stories, so I'll tell one on myself. My private lessons, my parents paid $14 a half an hour, and I lived on a farm, so that actually the trumpet teacher came to my parents' basement and taught the whole trumpet section at my high school. And every time I didn't practice, my parents made me pay $2, and every day I did practice, they would pay the $2. And I would hand the trumpet teacher a check for $8 and then $4 in cash or $6 in cash. And he'd say, oh, you didn't practice for 3 days, did you? So it was so it was a really good way to help my parents communicate with him. But yeah, you like that idea? And also, they were both musicians, and they heard me in the basement. And I'd come up the steps, and they's like, we didn't hear your Clark technical studies. You need to go back down and play those. So talk to the parents about what they should be playing, because sometimes parents are not musicians, and then they realize, oh, well, my flute student's been playing Let It Go for 35 minutes, and that's not practicing. So help those parents understand what a good lesson should be, because a lot of parents have never taken a lesson, and they don't know what their kids should be doing.
An important thing about communication with parents, if you tell a student they're not doing well, it is not a reflection of your teaching. That's something you have to let go soon. When I first started teaching, I was almost scared to tell the parents that they weren't doing what they're supposed to do, because I thought that was going to be a bad reflection on me as a teacher, that I wasn't motivating them and that I wasn't. You can use the parents to assist in that way, and they really are on your side. It's very easy when you first start teaching to feel really self-conscious and to feel scared about that interaction, but that is an important first step to making sure you have all the proper tools for motivation.
Exactly. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would encourage you to if you use a website for your, your studio, include information for parents on that. That can be really, really helpful for them. And a resource that they can use as well as you can. The other point I wanted to make is we're kind of talking about liabilities. If I'm jumping ahead, too bad. I can't retract it. But if you are teaching in public schools, and you have students in your classes who want to take private lessons with you, you need to make sure that that is okay with your school district. There is a conflict of interest, or there certainly could be a conflict of interest that might occur, and some school districts will not allow you to teach students who are in your programs privately. So that's something you need to check out.
And I personally do not do that. That's my line in the sand because I don't want a parent to feel like they're paying me to give their child principal chair. I always want to keep my band job separate from my private studio. So I never teach a student that is in my program, period.
Kids that get solos, you know, you could be putting yourself in jeopardy, like, well, so-and-so studies with you, so of course they're going to get this, you know, they're going to get the solo. So those are things to take into consideration.
I just want to jump back to the dealing with parents and the student as well. One of your jobs as a teacher is to become the most sort of powerful human that you can be so that you don't feel intimidated by the student or the parent. And I'm not talking about being, you know, a bully or anything, but you just need to be personally very powerful and know that it's okay for you to say what you need to say to the student. You're not trying to be their friend, you're not trying to ingratiate yourself with them. You have to tell them the truth. They will love you more, they will know that you love them more if you do that. And the parents will respect you much more. And what Matt said is extremely important because many parents, if you allow them to, they will make it your job. They will. And so you actually have to counteract that and make sure that they understand that it is not your job. I mean, it's partly your job to motivate the student, but there's more than 50-50 here. So yeah, I would say, and that becomes your job to be as large, sort of humanly as you can possibly be.
So we're getting towards the end, and what I'd like each one of you to do, we'll start with Mr. Miller, is one piece of advice or one teaching tool that you have that you really think that you're proud of and you'd like the students to basically adopt or steal from you or remember. So go ahead.
To understand, and it takes a while, but that different people have different learning styles. And going back to Joe LaBuda, he would say, the old cliche is, we teach the way that we've been taught. And he would say that that's not true. The truth is that we tend to teach the way that we learn. And I learn things a certain way, and so I start teaching a student the way I learn. But that student doesn't have the same learning style that I have. Now my message is not getting through. I need to understand how the student learns, and it takes time to, and have enough experience to work with enough students so you understand this, but then have numerous ways to say the same thing and get the task done. Get the message through to the student. If it doesn't go this way, I'll try this way. I'll try this way. I'll try this way. And one of those ways will hit. So as soon as you can, begin to start understanding how this person learns. Some people are a challenge and rapid fire information. Other people can't process it that way. Tailor your message to the style of learning that the student has.
My piece of advice actually builds on this perfectly. When you have a student who's not getting something, over and over again, you've given them multiple different approaches, you tried all the things in your bag of tricks. Ask the student to try to teach the concept to you, because then you're actually going to get what they grabbed from what you told them. And you'll see sometimes there are cross wirings. If you've used 6 different ways to explain something, they may grab the 2 things from 2 different ways that don't make any sense together and use that and think that that's the truth that they need to use. So get them to try and explain it to you and walk through that process. Sometimes just getting it vocalized from the student's perspective also gets them to realize where the misfirings or where the lack of comprehension is happening. And sometimes we get students that just can't even articulate what it is you've taught 7 different ways. They're like, I don't know. And then you have to go back to ground one and get them to repeat it back to you. Because you can talk to a student all day long. If it's not actually being connected up here and then translated into the physical activity that you want, and that's a complicated process. That requires multiple steps that can be misconstrued or misinterpreted. So having them explain it back to you helps you see into the window of what their mind is. So I think that's very helpful.
In the voice studio, probably 9 times out of 10, or maybe even 9.5 times out of 10, you are going to be also functioning in several roles. You're also going to be accompanying the student on the piano. So you've got to have piano skills that are going to be good enough that will allow you to do that. Yes, you can buy repertoire that comes with CDs and so forth, but it certainly limits you as to what you can do. So you're sitting at the keyboard, you're accompanying your student, you're listening to them, you're trying to assess everything, help them figure out what's wrong, what can you do to fix it. It's a challenging environment. I found that recording my lessons was really, really important because then I could go back, listen to them, listen to the student, and think about more carefully where my mind was focused on just the tone, for example, or technical aspects that we're working on, and then come up with a plan or something else that we needed to do to address those. So recording was good. Making sure that you have mirrors in your studio is really, really helpful. And the more the better, because you need to be able to have that visual to see what your students are doing. And again, I just want to reiterate that do no harm when you're working with your kids. Don't feel pressured into taking on students just because somebody thinks that you could be successful with it. If you're not comfortable teaching a certain type of repertoire or a certain advanced students versus beginner students, don't do it. Find links, give them some suggestions for other places that they can go for. People have one voice, you have one voice box, one instrument, and you can't replace it. It's, if you ruin it, you have nodes or surgery or things that need to, problems that are caused by that, you're done. So take that responsibility very, very seriously.
Okay, well, there's all of these things that have been said are super important, and just to piggyback a little bit on the do no harm, be sure that you take a healthy physical approach to whatever instrument or voice that you're doing. Make sure that your student is not continuing in habits that are going to cause them physical injury. But I have one really, really important one that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is that in order to be a successful performer and a successful musician, students have to have in their ear what the music sounds like, not just their piece, but what it sounds like to be a good performer on their instrument or voice. And most students, all they hear is themselves or their little friends at school, and if they're not listening a lot, like immersion training in language, if they're not listening all the time to the models of what they're supposed to sound like, they're probably not going to know what to go for. And if they are listening all the time, it's kind of amazing how quickly they will find ways to approach that sound. It's going to be in their ear, and if you can, now that there's YouTube, they can watch as many great performances as they want, and they can not only hear, but see how it's done. In many cases, the camera work is really, really good, and you can see exactly what the person is doing and how they're using their body. And I wish to God that we had had YouTube when I was a teenager. Oh my Lord.
We had to go to the music library and put in headphones and put the record, and they bring the record to you.
Yeah,
Trust us.
I mean, I would listen to records all the time, but you still can't see it. And then, we didn't go to that many live concerts. I don't think I heard a violinist live the whole time I was in elementary, and I just never really heard it. So the more that you can get your students listening and watching great performance over and over and over, and actually their mirror neurons, you guys all know what that is, right? Mirror neurons? Mirror neurons are a human, in fact a mammal trait, that we know how to look at something and our body will do it. Monkey see, monkey do, and we will do it, and your ear will take that as the default sound and try to make it. So do immerse your students in the best models of their instrument and other instruments so that they're learning the language.
Okay, and we're almost out of time. The last thing I'd like to leave you guys with is we are a community of practice. That is why we're here talking to you guys. Come talk to us, talk to your friends, talk to your peers. It's very easy as a private teacher to get siloed, and as Mr. Miller said, that Joe said to him, it's very easy to teach the way you thought you were taught and the way you learned. So if you're running into a trouble, ask somebody, say, hey, I got this little trumpet student who sounds like an elephant. What can I do to help them? Or I've never seen the clarinet do this in my life. Can you help me? Talking to each other. Also, I've got a 14-year-old girl who's going through too much trouble. How much can I keep her personal life out of my lesson? Things like that. And we've all seen it, and are all here to help you in this aspect of what you do. And so please be part of the community of practice and come talk to us. And we would love to hear from you, because you guys, I'm sure, have come up with things that we've never thought of. That would be really cool to work with students. The other thing I want to leave you with is teaching is fun. And be brave and do it. Give it a shot, and just remember what Dr. Butler said, do no harm, and have fun out of it. So can everybody please give a round of applause to my panel? All right, thanks guys, have a great, get ready for finals and last week of class.